Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, all you porcupines, this is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the New Hampshire Free State Project, Eric Brakey, coming to you for episode 76 of the Porcupine Report. Of course, we come to you every single Wednesday with a new episode covering some free state news and having interesting free-range conversations with people doing impressive and intriguing things across the liberty movement, both in New Hampshire and around the world. We're going to have a good episode for you today. First, I just want to say I am really grateful for something. You know what I'm grateful for? I got back yesterday. We're recording this on Monday. I had a whole travel day yesterday, coming back from Houston, Texas. I was down there in Lake Jackson for the Ron Paul 90th birthday barbecue, and, you know, a long day of travel and canceled flights and missed connections. And you know what? I made it home around midnight, and today I woke up and I was so jet lagged. You know what I'm grateful for? I'm grateful for Porcupine Coffee Roasting for helping me get through this jet lag. And of course, they are one of our sponsors on the Porcupine Report. I've been telling you about Porcupine Coffee Roasting, and I really do love it. I have a subscription. I get a bag of coffee grounds sent to me every single month. And as we say, look, this isn't just coffee. It's a revolution in your mug. It's proudly operated by Free Staters in the Free State. They roast only specialty grade beans from small producers, always fresh, roasted in small batches to order with a roast date you can trust. There are no stale beans from these liberty lovers. It's always fresh. And Porcupine Coffee is all about sovereignty. They're a private membership association. They embody the live free or die ethic, giving freedom-minded folks like you a way to choose liberty with every sip. It's crafted for the caffeinated and for the freedom-loving, perfect for those who want to keep that live free or die spirit alive with them every day. And when you drink Porcupine Coffee, you're supporting a small independent PMA powered by Free Staters dedicated to living free. And here's the deal. Use our discount code PORCREPORT for 15% off individual orders at porcupinecoffeeroasting.com. So this is a win-win-win. Not only do you get a great discount and you get to support a great private membership association of liberty-loving Free Staters, but a portion of your purchase will go back to support this show and help us keep coming and bringing you a new episode every single Wednesday at 7. So head to porcupinecoffeeroasting.com, get your delicious caffeinated beverages, and use our discount code PORCREPORT for 15% off. Live free, drink free, stay caffeinated, my friends. The solution to jet lag. All right, let's hop into the show. Now, as I did mention, I did come back from the Ron Paul barbecue, and it was really wonderful. There were 1,000+ people there from all around the country, folks who'd largely been involved in the presidential campaign efforts in 2008 and 2012. I saw so many old friends, some I hadn't seen in like 13 years since the Ron Paul 2012 campaign. And it was really nice. And I appreciated the opportunities. I was invited to be on the main stage and moderate a discussion with former Congressman Justin Amash of Michigan and current Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, who was actually briefly my congressman when I was living in Austin, Texas for a year and a half, working for Young Americans for Liberty. So that was wonderful. But one thing I was really touching was getting a chance to sit down for about an hour and record an episode of the Porcupine Report with Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht, frequent guest at the Porcupine Freedom Festival. And we had a fantastic talk. They had a whole podcast studio set up there. They let us use their people and their equipment to record an episode of this show. We're going to release that at some point. I don't know if we're going to release that as a bonus episode or in like the the regular lineup of the show. I will say more and more as the show grows in popularity, we're getting more and more requests from guests to come on the show, which is wonderful. Usually I'm out there like chasing people down, trying to line up guests. And we're finally at a point where people are chasing us down, trying to come on the show. So that's I think a good sign of growth as our audience continues growing. Thank you for being a part of it. And thank you for, 76 episodes. We're going strong. I do want to, of course, remind you to mark your calendars for some events we have coming up in the Free State. Next September 21st, we don't have tickets on sale yet. We're hopefully getting this together soon, but we are doing our Granite Freedom Trek, the first annual, which means that we are hoping to make this an annual event. But it's going to be a hiking event right at the start of autumn as the leaves are starting to change. We're going to be doing a day-long hike through the Free State, and we invite all who love liberty and love the great outdoors to come out and join us for that. So mark your calendar for Sunday, September 21st, and we're going to have a great time. And then in October, mark your calendar for Columbus Day weekend, long 3-day weekend. We're going to have Fall Fest with tons of great family-friendly events, including apple picking and corn mazes and a whole host of fun family-friendly things going on. Details forthcoming in the near future. And that same weekend on Sunday is going to be the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference. And tickets are already on sale for that at blockchainnh.com. I'm going to be speaking there, and there's going to be folks from around the country who are engaged in the cutting edge discussions about I keep wanting to call it emerging technology with blockchain, but I think it's pretty established now. I mean, what's Bitcoin worth now? It's worth like 120,000, and all these big institutions are buying in. So Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain, if that's your jam, we would love to have you there. And, bring the whole family, because even if they're bored of all this digital asset talk, they can go to Fall Fest all weekend while you go to the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference. Your wife will be happy, your kids will be happy, and you can geek out on all the digital asset talks. So, and then you can join them on Saturday and Monday for Fall Fest as well. So that's going to be, so those are some great events coming up in the Free State. Mark your calendars, and always kind of great excuses to come and visit us. And I will say one last thing before we get into our conversation with our guest today, is I'm very much looking forward to this month. I forget the dates exactly. Anyway, we're actually leaving New Hampshire. We're going to Maine. We're going to the Augusta Gun Show. That is in 2 weekends, I believe, in 2 weekends. Where Free Staters are going to the Augusta Gun Show, and we're talking with Maine gun owners about the events that we're hosting in New Hampshire. We're going to be selling some Free State Project branded AR-15 magazines, which actually the only states in New England where these are legal, because they are standard capacity magazines, which have been banned in every other New England state except for New Hampshire and Maine. We'll be selling those, and we'll be talking with folks about what New Hampshire has to offer as Maine slides further and further into tyranny. So folks are going to want to buy those AR-15 magazines while they still can, because who knows what the Bloomberg gun grabbers are going to be able to pull over in Maine as they keep pushing forward. Anyway, if you're in Maine or in the area you want to join us for that, we'd love to see you there. All right, let's hop into our conversation today. Now, let me premise this by saying I had a fantastic conversation with this guest at PorcFest. We had it in Liberty 101. It was a great conversation. And actually, after the conversation was over, someone pulled me aside and said, that was one of the most profound conversations on the nature of politics that I have ever heard. And I thought, you know what? I'm so glad we recorded this. That's going to make an excellent podcast. Well, someone forgot to hit the record button. So anyway, no pressure. I'm sure this conversation is going to be even better. And I'm always happy to talk with my friend who's joining us today. He was the vice presidential candidate on the Libertarian Party ticket in this last election cycle. He recently made the decision and the announcement to leave the Libertarian Party, join the Republican Party, and work with the Republican Liberty Caucus. We're going to be talking about those things and more. His name is Mike Ter Maat, and let's welcome him to the show.
Eric, you may have oversold that. Thanks for letting me join you, though. It's good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, I know. I've set the bar pretty high, so we better deliver now. The pressure is on.
Particularly when a lot that we have to talk about is pretty down to earth. It's pretty nuts and bolts kinds of concepts. They're not unimportant, but a lot of it really is blocking and tackling, as they say.
Well, I think that if you want to be effective in politics, then the nuts and bolts are something you have to understand and grapple with, right? If you don't know the rules of the game, if you don't know how the game works, then don't expect to win the game. The rules are not necessarily what you want them to be; they're what they are, and we need to live in that reality. And sometimes my friends who are Libertarian Party purists, I love them. I love them so much. But I sometimes wonder if they're beating their head against a wall over and over, expecting different results, complaining that the game is rigged, which it is, but not actually, grappling with how they should adjust to win in a rigged game. Sometimes you need to learn the rules better than your opponents. At least that's how I've always managed to win things. Is defeating the establishment, is learning their rule book better than they know it. But Mike, so I guess we could start. You were the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party.
Someone had to do it, Eric.
Someone had to do it, and you did it. I guess first of all, I was really struck by, when it was all said and done, you had written some takeaways, some lessons learned from that experience. I don't know if you recall kind of everything you wrote there, but I'll just ask you fresh, like, what was that experience like for you? And what were some lessons learned that you took away from the process?
Well, as we were just saying, I think that what really matters is fairly down to earth. Your ability to get in front of the media is driven by the media's interest. You're not going to change their mind. And I think it's important for anyone involved in politics to understand that politics is not about leadership. Politics is about meeting people where they are, and that includes donors, it includes other politicians, it includes voters, and it also includes the media. You are not going to convince a reporter to cover something that she or he had not already planned to do so, right? You need to meet each one of these constituencies where they are and make your case that you are something that can help their personal objectives, not the other way around. And for this reason, I think that a lot of politicians get themselves confused and want to believe that in some sense they're leaders, right? They're out there changing people's minds, which is not even the object of the game. The object of the game is to present an icon for certain types of thinking. This is why a lot of folks like the idea of being as pure as possible when representing your philosophy. Probably a good idea in many respects. You have to represent that philosophy as clearly as possible and let people who like that idea find you, buy into it, and support it. But it is rare that you just turn people around who think differently than you do. And trying to do that with the media is as difficult an uphill climb as there is in any business endeavor.
Yeah. So what were some of the, maybe the moments on the campaign trail that made these kind of lessons pretty clear for you?
Well, it's no secret that we had any number of challenges, right? It was very, very difficult for our campaign to raise money. And without a certain amount of money that could be spent on advertising and marketing, for example, it was very difficult to get a lot of traction with mainstream media or even big time podcasts, because they do follow the influence that the dollars make. And I don't even mean that in a disparaging sense. That's just, how the business works. There is a certain amount of pay to play, especially with mainstream media, deep entrenched and for many decades. They wouldn't characterize it as such, of course, but it absolutely exists. And so it's very difficult to break in. Without a certain amount of money, everything becomes more difficult. everything from compensating and retaining staff and expanding your staff to everything that it is that staff helps you do. And so you have a hard time getting the snowball rolling for fundraising or for media. And I think that the big picture here is extremely important. And that is to say, the Libertarian Party, which I love and will continue to love, and for which I will continue to root for many, many decades, I hope, into the future. The Libertarian Party is the third party in a two-party system. That means definitionally you're outside of the system.
Yeah.
And that implies a couple of different things. Number one, it implies, whether it's true in the long run or not, we will see, but it implies that in the short run, you're not going to make an impact on the result of any particular election if it is an election in which the two major duopolistic parties are deeply committed. That's just the way that's going to go.
Unless you're willing to play spoiler, because you can do that.
You can do that, but it is also not easy to get the kind of percent. If it's a race in which both candidates are committed from the other parties, it's not easy even to achieve the percentages necessary to act like a spoiler. We're all aware and proud of the examples in which 2% did it, right? 3% did it. We're aware of the forced runoffs in Georgia, for example.
Yeah. Well, and I think that those cases did create a certain leverage for the Libertarian Party this go around, because you had those past examples of, boy, that 2 to 3% can really make a difference. It does kind of put libertarians in the position of being kingmaker if they're willing to kind of use that leverage. And a lot of people don't want to use that leverage. They just want to vote for the LP candidate no matter what, because both choices are too reprehensible for them to even consider voting for. And I empathize with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it depends, I think, on the mechanism by which you would seek to be a kingmaker, right? I would have thought that the writing were on the wall regarding those runoff elections.
Yeah.
Seeing that 2% is enough to matter, obviously, or else there wouldn't have been a runoff election. And seeing that 2% went Libertarian, I would have thought that both the Republican and the Democratic candidates, perhaps arguably even more so the Republican candidates, would have gone after the Libertarian vote in a real earnest way. And I think that a reasonable observation would suggest that they didn't that much. They didn't fight hard for the fiscally conservative vote. They didn't try to put distance between them and a lot of social issues, for example. And so the Republicans didn't do as well as they thought they were going to do, right? Now, and we understand that in those particular cases, President Trump didn't help because there was not much turnout, because he was disparaging, how these things went in those runoffs. I'm just picking on the runoffs as an example. And then the other mechanism by which people often suggest that Libertarian candidates should play kingmaker is to bow out of an election at some point and endorse someone else. And that is almost definitionally a short run mechanism. It does not work in the long run, in the sense that, your party is not going to be backed enthusiastically if people believe you're going to be backing out every October.
Yeah.
So, that's a silver bullet once in a lifetime kind of thing, not a long-term strategy.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose certainly it's less complicated for a figure like RFK, who's not like operating in a political party that is requiring ballot access for future elections and stuff like that.
Well, it's an interesting point. One has to ask, what was he in it for?
I mean, I think kind of he would say he was in it for the health issues, and he got to be HHS secretary.
Right.
So hey,
good for him.
He got what he wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for him. I think a lot of folks on his team were disappointed. I'm not trying to speak for anyone in particular, nor am I saying anything that anyone who hears our voices doesn't already know, a lot of folks were disappointed, both in the idea that he dropped out and didn't continue all the way through the vote. And we can all argue that round or square. We understand why he did it. To your point, we understand why he did it. But there's also the disappointment of folks who thought that was going to be a longer term play, that there would be, not only would it be a campaign that went all the way through the vote, but in some sense maintain an organization thereafter.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And one of the things it demonstrated, the whole experience, one of the things it demonstrated is the difficulty of achieving ballot access and then setting up an organization that's going to maintain it into the future. To say difficulty is an understatement. And if you speak with the folks who are actually involved with that campaign, they would say exactly what it felt like watching it from the outside, which is, wow, it's hard. It's unimaginably expensive, and it's hard in ways that money can't necessarily overcome. There is not enough money on this planet to overcome some of the frustrations that are created in achieving ballot access by especially Democrats, but in many cases Republicans. It's just a very, very difficult to predict, unpredictable, unmanageable situation.
Yeah, and of course, ballot access is only the first part of it, right? I mean, it's still, you have ballot access in a two-party system, and you're the third party, and it's. I mean, I think, to be clear, why it's a two-party system, it's because it's a plurality-based first past the post system, and that means that it plays upon our natural human tendencies. And amplifies them to not vote for the person we like the most, but to vote against the person we fear the most. And so maybe the Libertarian Party ticket is the ticket you like the most, you agree with the most, but maybe you really, really are afraid with what Hillary Clinton's going to do if she gets in there, or Kamala Harris, or alternatively Donald Trump or the Republican ticket. And people tend to gravitate towards, well, I got to stop this person.
Yep.
And so they're going to vote for the lesser evil. And I mean, maybe if the system was different, maybe if it was a parliamentary system, but even that, I mean, that has its own drawbacks. And
of course it does. And so do all the various aspects of ranked choice voting and all the various versions. But you also bring up an interesting issue regarding the Libertarian Party and RFK Jr. in particular. You're necessarily going to attract people with a little bit different attitude than the majority of the people that vote inside the Republican Party, the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
There is a certain strategy, you might almost call it a tactic, of a lot of people inside the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and I shouldn't say inside the parties, but people who vote for those candidates are voting. Not only are they sometimes voting against someone else, but they're voting to make sure that what they get is something with which they're familiar and therefore tolerant, right? Whereas you get a lot of people inside of the Libertarian Party or in a third party movement like RFK's who are true believers. You opened up this discussion with talking about purity. A lot of people who support Libertarian Party candidates and the Libertarian Party, a lot of the Libertarian Party members and people who supported RFK, they, bless their hearts, they're in it for more important reasons than to win it. And so to talk about kingmaking and compromise and dropping out to achieve this little thing or that little thing doesn't always sit well with everybody and can leave a bad taste in one's mouth if what it is that you wanted to achieve requires a multi-year commitment and just, not simply making it through September.
Yeah. Well, and that's certainly where, I like to think that I'm looking at the big picture. And I think that one of my criticisms sometimes, or where I think that some of my friends in the Libertarian Party lose perspective, is I remember the years where Ron Paul would be running for Congress as a Republican, and Libertarian Party members They don't recruit someone to run in the general election against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. They recruit someone to run in the general election against Ron Paul in Texas because they are more upset with someone who is closer to them in their beliefs and ideology and not being in their party than someone who is diametrically opposed to everything they stand for. And that's where I sometimes think this is where I think we need to take a bigger perspective on the libertarian movement as bigger than any one political party. And these parties, whether it's the LP or the GOP or even the Democratic Party, if someone ever figured out how to use that as a vehicle for liberty, which doesn't really clear to be an obvious case for that right now, we should keep in mind that these are tools in our tool belt. These are not ends in and of themselves. Liberty is the end. And if we can use the LP as a tool to advance that, great. If we can run Liberty people in Republican primaries and co-opt the machinery of that machine to advance liberty, great. But I certainly meet some people who say there's no such thing as a Liberty Republican, and I guess I take it a little personally because that's how I identify, I suppose.
No such thing as, well, maybe you're the only one, Eric.
Maybe I literally on social media the other day, someone was, criticizing Dave Smith for being at the Ron Paul thing and said, oh, is he supporting Republicans again? And I said, well, what's wrong with supporting Ron Paul Republicans? And the person said, there's no such thing. I was like,
no such thing as a Ron Paul Republican?
Yeah, no such thing. It's like, wait a minute, you're telling me a Ron
Does
Paul
that mean there's no such thing as Ron or no such thing as Paul, or no such thing as a Republican? Maybe it's all a hoax. Maybe he didn't ever run for office.
Yeah, maybe he's just a bunch of squirrels in a trench coat, and he doesn't really. I don't know. I didn't scratch past the surface here. I didn't find that there was too much.
I wouldn't be surprised if we get an examination of this in a 2.0 sense. I wouldn't be surprised if Rand Paul runs for president, right? And
Rand or Massey or there's.
I would be surprised if Massey runs. But
I've asked him before. He looked at me when I asked him. He looked at me like I'd asked him to drown a bunch of puppies, and I learned never to ask him that question again. So I didn't want him ever to look at me like that.
There you go. It would give us an opportunity to do a number of things, not just test this theory of whether there are a lot of Republicans who would rally around it, which is an important thing to find out in an academic sense. But more importantly, it would give the Republican Party, a segment of the Republican Party, which is, of course, what I want to talk to you about in the long run, a chance to rally around something that is important, both in a practical sense and in a philosophical sense. I think that a lot of us feel like we would rally around a Rand Paul campaign, whether we thought it was going to win or not.
Yeah.
And that is an important statement, because I believe that the Republican Party is the likely vehicle for moving the needle. I think it's fair to say that a lot of folks on my campaign team and a lot of other folks in the Libertarian Party have lost faith in the idea that the Libertarian Party is going to be able to achieve everything in the future that we have always hoped that it would achieve. Yeah. And it would be terrific if I'm wrong about that. I hope in the long run I am wrong, but I don't see a lot of reason to believe that the next 50 years are going to be any different than the past 50 years for the Libertarian Party. And at the moment, that's a problem, because our government is presenting threats to our society that are in some sense potentially existential and are not the kinds of things that require a whole lot of decades to play out. We have problems coming at us pretty darn quick in a historical time span, right? In a matter of years, not decades. And those of us who see them coming, I think, have an obligation to do something about them. And that means doing whatever it takes. And what I believe that takes is no longer remaining comfortable inside the Libertarian Party, where maybe everyone agrees with you. By the way, it is not true purity notwithstanding, it is not true that everyone inside the Libertarian Party thinks that they all agree on everything.
I've certainly seen that to be the case. You never are. It seems like libertarians never argue more fiercely than they do with someone who they only disagree on 1% of things. But it's that 1% that gets in our craw.
That's absolutely true.
Now, tell folks about the Republican Liberty Caucus. I know this is an organization's been around for a long time. At various points in my political career, I've been a member myself in Maine.
Yep.
But you have, in making your decision to leave the LP, even though you still count them as friends, leave the LP, join the Republican Party. You're looking at the Republican Liberty Caucus as a vehicle to work within the GOP to realign it towards liberty. Is that a correct assessment? And tell us about the Republican Liberty Caucus.
It is a correct assessment, and indeed it is my vocation. I spend all of my working time now supporting, building up, trying to recruit for the Republican Liberty Caucus. The caucus is 30 some years old. It has had illustrious members like Eric Brakey and Rand and Ron Paul and Justin Amash and Thomas Massey, and hundreds and thousands of other terrific libertarians and liberty-minded folks. Depends on your definition of a libertarian, I suppose. But certainly the people who founded this caucus considered themselves libertarians and made a conscious decision and said so and wrote so when founding the caucus, that they thought it was a better idea, or at least a good idea, to launch this caucus inside the Republican Party as opposed to supporting the Libertarian Party. And that is an interesting statement. In other words, it's not often you see an organization start out, right, writing down its reason for existence, what we're going to do, and include in that, we've decided against Plan B. Or plan, this is Plan B, we decided against Plan A, or this is Plan A, we decided against Plan B. Rarely do you see, the kid winning the Heisman Trophy standing in front of the camera saying, the reason I didn't go into swimming, so I found it fascinating that the founding documents, include references to, we just decided not to join the Libertarian Party because we think this is a more realistic and practical vehicle to actually make change.
I can think
it wasn't a philosophical thing.
Yeah, I can think of two organizations that fit that bill. One is the Republican Liberty Caucus. The other is the Free State Project, which specifically formed in the early 2000s as a rejection of the National Libertarian Party strategy, is recognizing that, at that point, 30 years into the experiment, it wasn't working. It had produced no results. And so they said, what can we do differently? Let's try a different strategy. And
interesting that both of these examples, what it is they're rejecting is the same thing.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
It is the idea that libertarians should totally segment themselves off from all other kind of political coalitions, kind of exist in a third party, where it's almost like, I don't know, it's like it feels sometimes like libertarians are like in a quarantine camp where you just can't have any impact on what's going on in the inner workings of the other parties, which is ultimately, in a two-party system, the only way you can try to, I guess, directly influence.
It can definitely feel that way. And of course, you made reference earlier to the fact that there are so many different organizations in the liberty movement, and it has so many tentacles. And we need to recognize the fact that these are all tools, and merely tools, that these organizations are not humans. They are collections and tools of humans. They are things that humans use to accomplish their objectives. So when you put down the screwdriver and you pick up a hammer, the screwdriver's feelings should not be hurt. That's not what this is about. It's just, it's time to try a different tool for this particular application. And in our case, what we're doing is building up the RLC, the Republican Liberty Caucus, in the sense that we're starting new chapters all over the United States, which is a bit of a new emphasis for the RLC. There aren't in the main chapters in most of the states. In fact, anyone out there who can hear our voices today who would like to help launch a Republican Liberty Caucus chapter to represent New Hampshire, give me a buzz, right? Or, drop me a line at mike@termaat.com. I would love to work with you to launch that chapter. And indeed, I will be
is there
New Hampshire in a couple of months.
So is there not currently an active chapter in New Hampshire?
Correct. There is not actively at the moment a chapter. A long time ago there used to be, but it was not central to the strategy of the RLC. Whereas we believe going forward, it is an important element. And these state chapters can potentially be very important because the ones that will maintain relationships with state house reps, other politicians, other candidates, and do so in a tighter fashion than you would, be able to depend on a national organization to do all on its own. So it's a little bit broadening of the strategy, and one that I believe in very much. We've identified about a dozen folks all over the United States to start new chapters in their respective states. And I would love to talk to someone about doing that in New Hampshire.
Well, I'm sure with the concentration of libertarians, small L libertarians that we have here in New Hampshire, I'm sure there's someone out there who would be eager and ready to help start a chapter. And certainly, with 100 Liberty Republican legislators in the state house and so many activists on the ground,
absolutely,
I could imagine.
I'm coming out there in November. I'll be meeting with a number of folks, and if there's anyone out there that would like to get together in November, let me know, or just talk on the phone before I get there.
Let us know when you're coming out in November, and maybe we can make sure we could host you at a meetup or something too.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Whenever someone like yourself comes to New Hampshire, want to make sure you get a chance to really connect with the Free State community.
Well, I appreciate that. And you guys do a great job of running local events that foster that community feel. So I appreciate
I know
that.
That's where we met the first time, at one of those local events when you were coming through when you were seeking the presidential nomination.
That is exactly right. We were following you around in a snowstorm trying to figure out where Eric Brakey is going to be. And that was the high water mark for that particular trip to New Hampshire. I've been to New Hampshire, I think 4 times in the last 15 months or so. So it's an important destination for me personally.
Yeah. Now, if you could kind of, I guess, clarify for me a little bit more. So with the Republican Liberty Caucus, so like, what if let's say I was inclined to join an active chapter in New Hampshire of the Republican Liberty Caucus, and I came to like a meeting, or I got involved, like what would we actually be doing?
You would be talking about what are the next steps to building relationships with your candidates and elected officials in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So what we want to be doing is reaching out to the important. New Hampshire is an interesting example because there are so many important state house representatives that are liberty minded, right? So it's actually kind of a big job.
Yeah.
What you would be doing is talking about how we're going to reach out to those folks and begin building some relationships with these folks, and talking among yourselves about who it is that you want to be endorsing. And is there anything that you want to be doing beyond merely an endorsement for certain candidates? The RLC in any one particular state is not going to be very large when it starts, right? So a piece of what needs to be done is just a flat out recruiting effort. But even when it's relatively small, there's no reason why you can't pick out a handful of what you personally consider to be locally important races and participate in those, whether it's helping folks knock on doors or raise money or waving signs like a crazy person on the corner. And don't tell me we haven't all done it, because I know we have. those things can be very, very important and very inspiring. Folks like to get the RLC endorsement. The brand still means a great deal to some folks. It's a talking point. And so these are endorsements that leverage relationships and relationships that leverage those endorsements. So that's number one. That's a big one. And I mentioned recruiting.
I will say on that point very quick. I know when there was an active chapter in Maine,
Yep.
it did shutter at a certain point, and
Yep.
I appreciated when they shuttered. When they shuttered, they sent me like their last couple $100 in their treasury to my campaign.
Nice.
I guess that was a vote of confidence in what I would do with it. But I did appreciate it. Did help me differentiate myself when I was campaigning as not your just typical Republican, especially these are the days when we were closer to in time to like the George W. Bush era. And I really wanted to differentiate myself from that. And I could point to, coming from the Ron Paul movement, I could point to the Republican Liberty Caucus endorsement, and it did help me differentiate myself and perhaps win some swing voters who weren't sold on what was the prevailing Republican brand at the time.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. We believe that the RLC is particularly important these days because the Republican Party is a more interesting coalition than at some point in its past, right? One of the things that we all have to be prepared for is, what does the Republican Party do when Donald Trump leaves office?
Yeah. There will be a mad scramble for who will claim the flag. And I know that the neoconservatives are waiting in the wings for their opportunity.
They are waiting in the wings, and everyone's going to have a new way of defining themselves. People aren't going to go around calling themselves neoconservatives.
Right. They're going to call themselves the real America Firsters. We're going to be the first
more America first than you've ever been. We're firsters.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that a lot of that debate is going to cut along libertarian lines. I think that there is going to be on one side of the debate a certain tolerance for authoritarianism, a certain amount of nationalism, protectionism. We know this, right? Populism that oftentimes runs against the principles that we believe in as libertarians. And on the other side of some of those debates, there will be greater adherence to the Constitution, fiscal conservatism, more support for free markets, standing up for medical freedom, for example. I think a lot of these debates, and include you brought up neoconservatism. I think that there is still an important debate to be had inside the Republican Party regarding our foreign policy being so heavily based on military interventionism over the years. A lot of us are hopeful that President Trump has a libertarian streak that's dying to come out. And to the extent to which it's come out already, it's only been little. We hope that there's more in there dying to come out. So we've got our fingers crossed. We'll see how that actually plays out. I do believe that much of this debate over the next 2-3 years, but also over the next 7 years, over the next couple of cycles, will be couched in terms of what is the true legacy of President Trump? What is the true legacy of this administration? And whether it's a true representation of the administration or true representation of Donald Trump, I don't know. But that is, I think, how the debate will be couched, because even people who are upset about so many of the things that President Trump is doing are going to have a hard time running against him personally.
Yeah, I think kind of for a parallel in history, we can look to the degree that Ronald Reagan defined the Republican Party for a generation, and it wasn't always actually Ronald Reagan's actual record.
That's right. Good example.
It was people who came in with political and ideological agendas after the fact who would basically cultivate the history that we remembered of Ronald Reagan
and wrap themselves in the Ronald Reagan flag.
Exactly. And the neoconservatives were very effective at that. I know Jack Hunter was just on my program. We often talk about this, how the neoconservatives, Reagan's record was complicated and there's much to criticize, but there's also moments where he would get on the phone and talk to the leaders of the Soviet Union to de-escalate things. He would pull troops out of regions where we came under attack, and we realized there was no actual strategic interest for us to be there in the first place. But neoconservatives, after the fact, would selectively take those things and drop them down the memory hole. And redefine his foreign policy legacy as a neoconservative one, even though they were the ones who were wailing and moaning at the moment that Ronald Reagan did these things.
Of course. And so it's our job to convince everyone inside the Republican Party and elsewhere that President Trump is all about free markets.
The best part of Trump's legacy are the moments when he said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't start a war with Iran.
That's exactly right.
Even though he often led us up to the
that was the bombing to end all bombings, Eric. That was to stop war. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what this is all about. So anyway, you definitely get the idea. And as much as, we're not being silly about it. I mean, it sounds glib, but we're not being silly about this. I do think that how we define President Trump's legacy is going to, in no small part, determine how this debate moves.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to remember that while this is a relatively long-term project in the sense that it's over the next 3 years and over the next 7 years, it's not over the next 3 decades. That I mentioned earlier, there are existential threats facing us, that the federal government of the United States is not going to make it 3 decades as a financial proposition without a serious course correction in terms of the amount of money it spends.
Yeah.
Okay. That ought to give us a sense of urgency, because if the federal government of the United States fails to meet its financial obligations at some point, and remember, this goes slowly and then it goes fast. Almost definitionally, every time a public sector organization fails to meet its obligations, everyone is shocked. Everyone is surprised. It goes very quickly, right? You watch it from a distance for years, and then all of a sudden on Monday you're screwed. And it's
we can all, those of us old enough can remember the 2008 housing crisis, and there were people warning about it, like Dr. Paul was, for years leading up to it, and dismissed as kooks and cranks, and then suddenly it happens and everyone is like, well, nobody could have seen this coming. And it happened very fast when it happened. Everyone
could have, and a lot of people did see it coming. The fact that,
but they weren't the respectable people, so they're forewarnings we don't even need to acknowledge.
That may be, and all kinds of sovereigns got in trouble starting in the 80s and 90s, and it's just one of those things that creeps up on you, and people always feign an inability to have seen it coming. So the point is that if we don't make a course correction pretty quick, we could be in trouble without even knowing it. And we don't have time to wait for an adjudication of which tool in our tool belt is going to work. We need to try them all. Yep. If it turns out that the Libertarian Party or some third party candidate, RFK runs again, if one of those turns out to be the screwdriver that turns the screw and is able to capture enough power or enough votes, enough influence to stop the fiscal runaway train, terrific, right? I'm skeptical, but I believe that not only is the Republican Liberty Caucus the most logical, but the tool that is most likely to succeed and one worth trying. And I think that I'm probably the most logical guy to do that. I don't think the Libertarian Party is going to miss me. I think that whatever value there was to be extracted from our campaign on behalf of the Libertarian Party has already been extracted. And it's time for us to try something inside the Republican Party. Of course, I was a member of the Republican Party for a long, long time. I worked for George Herbert Walker Bush in '92 in the re-election campaign. That's going back a ways. So the Republican Party is a place where I have some cultural affinity, even if by being a libertarian, you don't always fit perfectly with everybody.
Well, and I will say too, something that gives me some optimism for the Republican Party, even as Donald Trump has of late disappointed me profoundly. I'm glad that he freed Ross Ulbricht. I'll say that up front. But certainly I've been disappointed in the way that he has handled the Iran situation and the Israel-Palestine situation, and the way that the neoconservatives on his shoulders seem to be getting
winning
more and more in his ear on some of these foreign policy decisions. At the same time, it has been very encouraging for me to see that many in the Donald Trump MAGA America First base do not seem to be the personality cultists that they've been accused of being. Some of them are, don't get me wrong. Some of them, Donald Trump says the sky is blue one day, and they'll say he's so right, and then he'll say it's red the next day, and they'll say he's so right, and anyone who says that the sky is blue is like a traitor to the country. There are some of those folks, right?
Or worse, a traitor to the party.
Right. Right. There are some of those folks, but then you have individuals like Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I did not have a very high opinion of when she first got into Congress, but I think that she seems to have matured in the role to the point where now she is like standing on a principle that the America First movement was supposed to be about. And even as Trump has gone against it, that she's even, standing her ground there. I mean, that's encouraging. And it has
fascinating.
It has seemed to me that, in some respect, the America First base of the Republican Party is in fact better than Donald Trump. And some of those folks can be, pulled into a liberty coalition in the future in a post-Donald Trump Republican Party, if we can speak to them on where they are, and we can recognize. I mean, I personally always go back to, I don't know what you think about it, but like the Rothbardian libertarian populist strategy that Ron Paul embodied and Javier Milei in Argentina has embodied. I mean, that is something that can pull together a coalition that can include a lot of these folks.
I think you're exactly right. And it's interesting how you put it, that, even better than President Trump. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that it's up to us to define what we mean by Donald Trump. It's up to us to define that legacy and give folks something to hang on to that's both tangible and palatable to libertarians in the future. Look, it does matter, people's relationship to Donald Trump. And I think it's important for us to remember that the administration is full of a lot of people who I got to find the right words. Are dingleberries. The administration is full of a lot of folks who aren't stupid,
but they're total yes men, and they're total
yes men, and they end up doing stupid things.
Yeah.
And so let me offer a couple of quick examples. It's okay for President Trump to say, I want to make long-term the tax cut, right? The tax is going to expire. I like lower taxes. My people like lower tax. Everybody hates taxes. We want to we want to extend that. Okay, we get that. And it's okay for the president to say, we're not going to be cutting spending all that deeply. By the way, I think flying under the radar screen is how important the changes in Medicaid were. Philosophically, they're extremely important, even if the amount of money.
You mean like the work requirements?
Yeah.
And I agree 100%. I worked on those exact policies when I was chairing the Health and Human Services.
Even if the amount of money is not what it needs to be in the long run,
it will help people break out of these generational cycles of dependence.
When you see someone who was able to vote for that and they weren't struck down, by lightning bolt the next hour, that's an important proof point. So anyway, it's okay for the president to say these things, and for him to be made aware of the fact that expands the deficit and expands the debt that needs to be accumulated over time, blah, 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 blah. Okay. It is not okay for the Treasury Secretary of the United States to say, I don't put a lot of credence. Credence was the word he used. I don't put a lot of credence in the fact that these rating agencies have downgraded the credit ratings of the United States sovereign debt. That is not okay. That is literally your job, is to control the flow of money inside and out from the government. And the main way that is done is by raising debt. And you just said, basically, you're trying to use nice words, but you basically said, I don't give a rat's ass. That is not okay. That's the one guy. If the rest of the population of this planet said they didn't care, that wouldn't bother me as much as that one guy. That's the one guy who is not allowed to say, I don't really care about the credit rating of the United States government. That's the most important part of his job, is to care about that. Let me throw out another example. It's okay for the president of the United States to say, we need to get control of the border. I think most Republicans, most Democrats, and statistically speaking, I even think most libertarians agree with that. And it's okay for him to say, we're a nation of laws, and that means that we need to enforce our immigration laws. And people here illegally, they need to be deported. And by the way, this is something on which I was elected, and I'm a populist. So lickety split, chop, chop. I want to see as many people deported as possible. All right. Now, you and I may disagree with the policy, but that's the kind of thing that you might say that, the chief executive is allowed to say that, right? Okay. We get that. It is not okay for Homeland Security and ICE to say, we're gonna lower the bar that courts have used to define what reasonable suspicion means, right? We're gonna start arresting people based on something lower than articulable reasonable suspicion, which is something every police officer in the United States, take it from me, understands cold. It's not a whole bunch of people over there are trying to get jobs in the parking lot of Home Depot, and they look and sound as though they might be illegal immigrants. That doesn't cut it. And there's a difference there, right? You wouldn't expect Donald Trump or any other president of the United States to understand what reasonable suspicion is or where the courts have been on this. You might hope he's more respectful of the Constitution than he has been. But at the detailed level, no one is shocked that he doesn't understand this.
Yeah.
But I am surprised that ICE pretends not to understand it. I'm also surprised that ICE seems to think that it's okay to, I need to use my fingers here, deport people to a prison in El Salvador based on reasonable suspicion, when we all know, based on court rulings and logic and adherence to the Constitution, that you don't lock people up unless you know that they have committed a crime. And we don't set the bar at reasonable suspicion. We don't even set it at probable cause, which is what it takes to arrest them for that. We set it at beyond a reasonable doubt to imprison someone, right? These things matter in a way that undermines the president's agenda itself. So if you are the world's biggest Trump fan, right? There's a lot of folks out there listening, I'm sure, to your show, Eric, who are giant Trump fans. And I don't know how sarcastic I should be about that. Maybe there are a lot of people listening.
I'm sure there are some.
And that's true.
Or at least some who maybe aren't totally TDS in the other direction.
Well, that's exactly right. And like I say, we all hope
we can see the good and the bad.
Absolutely. You're big fans of good Trump, right? Good Trump, bad Trump. We're all fans of good Trump. Okay. If you're rooting for a lot of what good Trump stands for, you've got to be pissed off at the Department of Homeland Security screwing this up. You've got to be pissed off at the Treasury Department screwing this up. You can't believe in the president's long-term agenda and think that flaunting the Constitution, flaunting the credit rating of the Treasury Department of the United States, you can't believe those are good ideas. These aren't just bad ideas for the country.
Yeah.
For true red-blooded Republicans, it's bad for the party.
Yeah. And certainly undermining the rule of law is not how you establish law and order.
It is not how to establish law and order, and it is not how to establish these policies in the long run. It's how to promise they're going to be, unwound as soon as the president is out of office.
Yeah. Well, Mike, we are in fact over the time limit that I would typically have, but I think this conversation has been so fascinating. I don't know if we sailed over that bar of the most fascinating conversation that one person has ever heard, but it has been fascinating to me. We are over on time. We could go for another hour if I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future. I want to give you opportunity, final thoughts, anything you want to share before we wrap up.
I think that everyone should have a sense of urgency. You and I just barely touched on that. We have the fiscal crisis we're looking at. We have a foreign policy in the United States that has lasted many, many, many decades. Take it from someone with some gray hair. That is not in our long-term self-interest and poses an existential threat to our society. And I would also say that the polarization of our politics, which is for reasons that we all understand. We've seen the absence of shared experiences because of the bifurcation of our media, the fall of various institutions that have ceded so much influence and authority to the federal government and to other governments. For these reasons, we've had the development of a polarized society, which I also believe presents an existential threat to our society in the long run, which is something that I would not have said even 10 years ago. I was really struck and hurt by Kathy Hochul the other day saying about the redistricting in Texas. She said, she's in New York, obviously. I'm not trying to sow confusion here. But she said, this is war. Is it? I don't think it is. But saying that not only makes you sound dopey, but makes you part of the problem. And I believe that this problem is going to be something that gets addressed for the first time in a serious way in the next presidential cycle. I think that there will be candidates who recognize that the polarization itself is a major issue, as opposed to just some tactical thing you got to work through on your campaign. I think it's going to start to be a major issue. So we should have a sense of urgency. We should have a feeling that whatever it takes, we're willing to do. And so I'm grateful for the chance to talk to you about that. And I look forward to doing whatever it takes.
Well, Mike, if someone here in New Hampshire or any other state, because we do have people who tune in from all around the country, if they are interested in getting involved in the Republican Liberty Caucus, particularly someone in New Hampshire, if they're the person jumping up and saying, I'd love to be the person to start the chapter for that.
That's me, and I got 2 thumbs. Right.
What should they do?
They should email me at mike@termaat.com. You'd have to spell it correctly, and there's 2 A's in Ter Maat, so that's kind of screwed up. But you can go to miketermaat.com. You can email me. You can find my phone number there somewhere. I think it's still on there. You can also go to rlc.org, right? You can join. It's only $45, best $45 that can be spent in politics in 2025. And that'll make you a member. But to get involved, I want you to reach out to me and give us the chance to have a chat and find shared interests and objectives.
All right. Well, maybe that person is out there and they're already kind of opening up their email and they're getting ready to send you, if they can only spell your name right. Otherwise, they can go to RLC.
Otherwise, I'll go rlc.org and reach out to our chairman, John Dennis, whose name is easier to spell.
Oh, yeah. I just saw John Dennis down at the Ron Paul birthday.
Exactly, you did. John is a terrific guy. His name is easier to spell, and you'll find his email at rlc.org.
And he is always the guy to take it on the chin when he challenges Nancy Pelosi for her congressional seat in San Francisco. I saw him too. He helped host when I was out in California doing a fundraising tour. Thomas Massey was out there too and was doing some fundraisers, and I went to one, and John Dennis was the one introducing Thomas Massey. So good man all around. And
Good man all around. I'm a big John Dennis fan, Thomas
Yeah.
Massey fan, Rand Paul fan.
Yeah.
And now I am, mark my words, a big Eric Brakey fan.
Well, I'm a Mike Ter Maat fan. So thank you, Mike, for coming on the show. And we'll look forward to, sounds like you're coming to the Free State in November. Let us know, and we'll love to welcome you.
Thank you, Eric.
All right. Thank you, Mike. All right, everyone, that's the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 76 of the Porcupine Report. Again, had a great weekend down at the Ron Paul 90th birthday barbecue. I will say one thing that was overshadowed by the whole affair was it was also my birthday on August 8th, which was Friday. I turned 37. So thank you to everyone who wished me a happy birthday. I didn't mention it to Mike, so Mike's probably off stage now kicking himself saying, oh, I didn't. Anyway, I appreciate all the warm birthday wishes for myself and for Dr. Paul. And let's see what else to mention. Of course, thank you to our sponsor, Porcupine Coffee Roasting. You can get your 15% off individual orders at porcupinecoffeeroasting.com. Use our discount code PORKREPORT. Remember to mark your calendars for upcoming events in September the 21st, the Granite Freedom Trek in October over Columbus Day weekend, Fall Fest, and the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference. So many things going on in the Free State. You would be a fool to miss out and never come and visit. You know, you got to come out and experience the Free State and the Free State community. And I suppose that's what I got for you today. So thank you, everyone. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.